So in the last video, we saw how populations have the potential to grow exponentially through their intrinsic rate of increase, right? Remember, Linnaeus figured out that an annual plant that makes just 2 seeds would have 1 million individuals in 20 years. We figured out that it would take less than 5 years for corn to spread across the world if it was left unchecked. But then when we looked at real populations, we see that that's not how populations grow. They are held in check. They have something called a carrying capacity, which limits how big they can get and causes them to slow down. Right? So population growth rates are influenced by many things in both space and time. And ecologists generally break these into 2 different kinds of processes. Processes that are density dependent or density independent. And these mean exactly what they sound like they mean. So a density dependent process is operating differently at low population densities than it is at high population density. So how it operates is going to depend on where you are on this curve. Whereas a density independent process, it's the same no matter what the population density is. It just happens the same whether you're here or whether you're here. Right, so density dependent factors are things that influence birth and death rates according to crowding, right? According to the density of the population. And so you could think of what these might be, but they're probably pretty obvious. It's things like resources. The more individuals there are, the more limiting resources will become. Spaces to grow if you're a plant. It might depend on predators, disease, parasites, all these things that probably have stronger effects in really crowded populations, right? We're seeing that right now, that some of the more densely populated cities are getting hit the most by COVID-19. Density independent factors are effects that change birth and death rates that have nothing to do with crowding, right? They're completely independent of density, like I showed you before. This can be things like temperature or fire, right? A forest fire doesn't care what the population size is, it just burns everyone. And so the effect is the same no matter how crowded the population is. And it's important to realize, and ecologists argued about this for a long time, but only density dependent factors can possibly bring a population under control, right? So the density independent factors can never create the population carrying capacity. It's only the density dependent factors. And this is really important to keep in mind. And so density dependence then can lead to something in plants that's known as self-thinning. So we can stop and think, how does a farmer choose the density to sow their seeds? Right? We know that if the crop is planted too densely, it's going to potentially change the number of seeds that it can produce, the birth rate. Right? Remember, farmers really care about the birth rate because that's what they're going to sell. It's the seeds they want to sell of most crops. So here's some data that shows you the density of surviving plants and then the size of each individual plant. So not surprisingly, if we plant plants very sparsely, so that's what's showing in this picture here, we get really big individuals. And as we add more and more density, we get smaller and smaller individuals. And actually, it follows this self-thinning rule that's sort of a -3/2 roughly power law. That's not super important for this class. But what we see is that in crowded populations, no matter where they are, there's just a bunch of different studies from a bunch of different places. We see that crowded plants suffer more mortality, slowed growth, and importantly for farmers, reduced seed production. And so how does a farmer pick a yield or pick a seeding density, right? The plant population density that's going to maximize the birth rate or the grain yield, right? It's pure population ecology. So here is a graph from pioneer.com. These companies keep changing names. I don't even know if Pioneer is called Pioneer anymore, but whatever. And this is their suggestions for corn, that you should plant somewhere around, I don't know, what is this, 37 or so thousand plants per acre. And how do they figure this out? Well, they figured it out based on this rate level plot. Literally, it is the dNdt plotted against n, and they get this rate level plot. So you want to plant your crops at a density that's going to maximize the reproduction. In fact, that's exactly what farmers do, and it has to do with these density dependent processes. Okay, so here are your review questions. I'm not going to read these for you, but you're going to have the slide. So just like always, you should be able to answer all of these questions, and as long as you can, you're going to do really good in this class.